Leora's first cries echoed under a sky alight with celestial wonder, a rare alignment of stars that left the heavens aglow with silver and gold. The villagers who had long revered the stars for guidance and omens, paused in awe, sensing that this birth carried a significance beyond ordinary life. From the moment she opened her eyes, it was clear that Leora was no ordinary child. Her gaze shimmered with a light that mirrored the constellations above, soft and mesmerizing, as if the stars themselves had chosen her to bear a fragment of their glow. Even in the dim light of her modest home, she radiated a subtle luminescence, drawing the attention of neighbors who could not help but whisper their amazement. Some spoke with reverence, calling her the child of stars, while others, envious of the wonder she inspired, muttered fears and warnings about the unnatural beauty she carried. Leora's mother, Celine, embraced her daughter with a love that seemed to infuse the room with warmth, whispering hopes and blessings meant to guard her through life's trials. But fate proved unkind. When Leora was still a toddler, her mother fell ill suddenly, leaving a void of grief and sorrow in the household. Her father, Adriel, a man gentle yet bound by social expectation, struggled with the loss, torn between his love for his daughter and the pressures of providing a household figure to maintain propriety. Within a year he remarried, bringing into the home Isra, a woman whose beauty could captivate the eyes but whose heart harbored shadows. Isra's elegance and charm initially masked the harshness beneath. She smiled with precision, spoke with sweetness, yet her envy simmered quietly, drawn irresistibly to Leora's luminous presence that seemed to upstage her every calculated gesture. Villagers quickly noticed the subtle tension that wove itself into the household. While some admired Isra's grace, others saw the harshness hidden behind polite words, and they whispered that her envy of Leora's starlit eyes could not remain hidden forever. Leora, for her part, remained unaware of the complexity around her, her innocence a shield against malice. Yet even as she played in the garden or gazed up at the night sky, she felt the subtle watchfulness of those around her, as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the day when her gift would be tested. From the very beginning, Leora's connection to the stars was apparent. Even infants in the village, sensitive to omens and celestial signs, sensed that she carried a light that transcended ordinary human radiance. The elders, wise in the ways of prophecy and fate, remarked quietly among themselves that her birth coinciding with the alignment was a message, a sign that she would one day change the course of events for the village in ways no one could yet imagine. They spoke in hushed tones of protection, advising those who watched her to treat her gently, lest her gift be stifled or harmed by human jealousy. Leora grew under the careful guidance of her late mother's teachings, the stories of the stars and their secret languages forming a silent bond between mother and child that persisted even after Celine's death. Every night, she would sit at the window, her eyes reflecting the constellations, feeling a kinship with the patterns that traced the sky. It was as though the stars themselves whispered encouragement and wisdom, their subtle glow mirrored in her gaze, hinting that her path, though fraught with hidden dangers, was blessed and watched over by forces beyond earthly understanding. Her father, though well-meaning, often struggled to mediate between his new wife's ambitions and Leora's gentle nature. Isra, while outwardly courteous, viewed the girl's starlight eyes with suspicion and quiet resentment, plotting to ensure that her own daughter might rise above the luminous presence that seemed destined to overshadow them both. Leora, too young to understand malice fully, felt only a vague unease, a tension that seemed to hum in the air like the subtle tremor before a storm. The villagers noticed this too, their eyes shifting between the girl and her stepmother, whispers traveling on the wind. Some spoke of blessings and stars, others of envy and foreboding. Despite the undercurrents of jealousy and fear, Leora's starlight eyes remained constant, a gentle beacon that drew admiration from some, envy from others, and quiet wonder from all who witnessed it. Even in her early years, the villagers remarked that the child seemed to carry the heavens within her, a living reflection of the celestial alignment that had heralded her birth. It was whispered that the stars themselves kept vigil over her, tracing her steps with light, guiding her spirit, and preparing her for the trials and revelations that destiny had laid before her. In every glance and every flicker of her luminous gaze, Leora embodied the rare promise of the cosmos. Beauty, light, and destiny intertwined, waiting for the moment when the world around her would either embrace her gifts or attempt to quench them in envy and fear. The stage was set, the constellations above watching patiently, and the story of the girl born under the stars began to unfold, its first chapters written in wonder, light, and whispered prophecy. From the earliest days after Isra joined the household, a subtle tension began to weave itself through the rooms of Leora's home, almost imperceptible yet impossible to ignore. Isra's beauty and charm had initially captivated the villagers, who admired her elegance and the way she carried herself with grace, but beneath the surface, a simmering envy festered. She watched Leora with keen eyes, noting the way people whispered their admiration for the child's starlight eyes and the gentle warmth that radiated from her presence. Every compliment, every smile directed at Leora, pricked at Isra's pride, igniting a quiet, growing resentment that she carefully masked behind courtesy and sweetness. The household began to shift under Isra's subtle influence. Meals, once shared with care and laughter, now carried invisible hierarchies. Celia, Isra's daughter, received the choicest portions, the most attention, and the softest words of encouragement, while Leora's contributions were downplayed or dismissed. If Leora sang or recited tales of the stars, Isra would murmur, loud enough for others to hear, that the child's imagination was fanciful and impractical, distracting her from the duties of daily life. Yet, in the village, people continued to notice the radiance of Leora's eyes, the innate kindness in her gestures, and the gentle light she carried in her demeanor. Villagers whispered among themselves, some admiring her grace, others wary of the growing tension in her home, sensing that envy was quietly poisoning the household from within. Isra's manipulations extended beyond simple favoritism. She began creating situations that highlighted Leora's perceived shortcomings. Tasks were assigned with impossible expectations. Chores that seemed minor to Celia became monumental for Leora, often designed so that small mistakes could be amplified into signs of incompetence. Guests were subtly guided to focus on Celia, while Leora's contributions were minimized or attributed to chance. Yet Leora, with her starlit eyes and gentle heart, remained unresentful. She did not retaliate or harbor bitterness. Instead, she observed quietly, noting the subtle shifts in tone, the half-hidden glances, and the whispered instructions that indicated her stepmother's growing scheming nature. Despite the growing tension, moments of clarity emerged for Leora, brief flashes when she recognized the undercurrents of envy and the motives behind Isra's actions. She noticed how Celia's laughter, once bright and innocent, began to mimic Isra's carefully measured smiles, a learned performance rather than genuine expression. The girl's voice, meant to be free and natural, was increasingly constrained by the expectations set by her mother, echoing the subtle pressure that weighed upon Leora herself. In the quiet hours, Leora would sit by the window, gazing at the constellations above, finding solace in the unwavering light of the stars, their patterns steady and true compared to the shifting dynamics of her home. Outside the household, villagers began to notice the subtle strain as well. Neighbors who once greeted Leora with warmth saw her increasingly quiet demeanor, her eyes reflecting not sadness but quiet resilience. Elders who had once shared stories of the stars and their guidance noticed her contemplative gaze, sensing that she was learning early the ways of patience and understanding, the importance of observing before acting. Whispers traveled along the wind. Some spoke of envy, some of protection, and others of the mysterious light that continued to shine in her eyes despite Isra's growing influence. Isra's jealousy, though carefully hidden in polite words and measured gestures, began to take on more deliberate forms. She introduced rules that subtly confined Leora's movements, forbidding her from visiting certain parts of the village or engaging with elders who had once shared their wisdom freely. Celia was encouraged to participate, to receive praise and recognition, while Leora was reminded, gently but firmly, of her place in the household hierarchy. Yet Leora's heart remained untainted. She did not speak ill of her stepmother or her half-sister, understanding even at her young age that anger and resentment could cloud judgment and diminish the strength of her own light. Small acts of kindness became her refuge. Leora helped with chores without complaint, offered smiles to the villagers when she could, and continued to study the stars in quiet moments. The constellations seemed to respond to her perseverance, their light unwavering as she navigated the subtle traps and manipulations placed in her path. Each night, as she traced the patterns above, she felt guidance and reassurance, a promise that her inner light, though challenged, could not be extinguished. Within the household, Isra's manipulations grew more intricate. She whispered comparisons between the girls, encouraging Celia to see Leora as a rival, planting seeds of pride and suspicion. Yet Leora's observant nature allowed her to detect these influences early, and she met Celia's growing competitiveness with quiet patience and gentle empathy. She treated her stepsister with kindness, refusing to mirror the envy that surrounded her, choosing instead to let her actions reflect the strength of her heart rather than the schemes of her stepmother. By the end of the year, the household's dynamics had shifted noticeably. The tension was no longer hidden, it hung in the air like a fine mist, observable to all who entered. Villagers sensed the subtle discord, yet could not help but admire Leora's composure, her unwavering kindness, and the faint, steady glow of her starlit eyes. Isra's jealousy had grown into a tangible force within the home, but rather than dimming Leora's spirit, it had strengthened her resolve. She learned early that envy, while dangerous, could be met not with retaliation but with patience, observation, and the quiet power of a heart that remained true to itself. And so, within the walls of her father's home, under the careful observation of stars that never wavered, Leora grew in both wisdom and strength, guided by light unseen and prepared for the trials that her stepmother's envy would inevitably bring. The change in the household was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but Leora, with her starlit eyes and careful observation, soon began to notice the difference. Isra's smiles, once polite but distant, became sharper, her gaze lingering too long on Leora with quiet calculation. The stepmother had begun plotting to keep the girl hidden from the world, to obscure the light that shone so naturally from her. Small adjustments in daily routines were made, seemingly innocent, yet each was a step toward confinement. Leora was asked to remain indoors under the guise of protection, to help with chores or study quietly, and to avoid unnecessary attention in the village. Invitations to gatherings, festivals, or communal celebrations no longer reached her. Isra's words were polished and sweet, but the intent behind them was clear. Leora was to be contained, her gifts kept away from the eyes of those who might admire or cherish them. At first, Leora tried to understand the reasons behind her confinement. She questioned gently, seeking explanations from her father, but Adriel, torn between loyalty to his new wife and the love for his daughter, offered only vague reassurances. The household became a landscape of careful navigation, where Leora learned to move quietly, to speak softly, and to occupy spaces that had been subtly designated as hers. Every corner of the house seemed to have boundaries she was not meant to cross, rooms that were forbidden or spaces where she might be watched too closely. Even in the garden, where she had once freely chased sunlight and chased butterflies, Isra's presence lingered like a shadow, directing attention and constraining movement. Yet Leora, in her quiet observance, found solace in the night. When the household slept and the world outside seemed distant, she would slip to her small window and gaze at the stars above. The darkness, far from being a prison, became a canvas on which patterns unfolded. She began to notice constellations shifting subtly, forming symbols and paths that seemed to respond to her gaze. These were not ordinary arrangements, Leora realized, but a language written in light, guiding her, teaching her, offering directions that were invisible to those bound by jealousy and fear. The stars spoke with a gentle insistence, their glow illuminating possibilities even when doors and walls attempted to contain her. Leora's nights became a time of quiet discovery. She traced the constellations with her fingers against the glass, memorizing shapes, connecting points of light, and interpreting the subtle messages embedded within their arrangement. There were moments when she felt as though the stars themselves were stretching down, creating pathways through which she might move freely, invisible to those who would seek to suppress her. Each flicker and twinkle seemed to whisper encouragement, as if the universe had aligned itself to protect the child it had chosen. Even within the confines of the house, Leora learned that freedom could be found in perception, in understanding, and in the quiet alignment between her heart and the cosmos above. Isra, meanwhile, grew more meticulous in her efforts. She blocked access to the village square, intercepted messages that might have invited Leora to gatherings, and created new rules that framed the girl's natural curiosity as disobedience. If villagers asked about her, Isra would offer excuses, citing health or study, presenting a facade of care while concealing the deeper intent. Yet in her efforts to hide Leora, she underestimated the quiet determination growing within the girl. Leora's mind was active, her observations sharp, and her connection to the stars only deepened, providing guidance where human oversight fell short. In the silent hours, Leora began mapping escape routes and safe places within and around the household. She discovered hidden alcoves, secret staircases, and overlooked doorways, tiny passages unnoticed by those focused on control rather than observation. The stars seemed to highlight these spaces in subtle ways, a flicker aligned with a corner, a constellation's bend pointing toward a hidden stair, a subtle shift in the night sky marking the safest path to move unseen. Leora's understanding of the house and the world around her expanded, guided by a combination of observation, intuition, and celestial insight. Despite Isra's attempts, the village could not erase the girl's presence entirely. Leora continued to leave subtle traces of her light, helping neighbors quietly, leaving small gifts or notes of encouragement, and performing acts of kindness in ways that could not be fully hidden. Each act strengthened her reputation among those who observed carefully, while the stars continued to guide her, revealing paths and lessons that no confinement could erase. Through this time, Leora learned patience and discernment. She saw Isra's envy as a force to be understood rather than confronted, a shadow against which her light could grow stronger. The household became a proving ground, teaching her to navigate secrecy, to read intentions, and to act in ways that preserved her integrity. The stars, faithful in their nightly vigil, became her mentors, companions, and protectors, illuminating paths that led not only through the house but also toward the destiny awaiting the girl born under their glow. In the quiet, secret moments of each night, Leora's resolve crystallized. She understood that confinement was temporary, that hidden corners and forbidden rooms could not contain the light within her, and that guidance, quiet, patient, celestial, would always point her toward freedom, understanding, and the path she was meant to follow. Through observation, intuition, and the quiet language of the stars, Leora discovered that even in the shadow of envy and restriction, she could move unseen, learn, grow, and prepare for the moment when her light would shine freely for all to witness. Night after night, as the household settled into uneasy quiet, Leora would slip to her small window, her gaze lifting to the heavens where the constellations stretched across the dark canvas of the sky. The stars were steady and unyielding, their light unaffected by the petty shadows cast by Isra's envy or the narrow confines of the house. At first, their patterns seemed random, scattered points of brilliance that twinkled softly against the inky darkness. But gradually, Leora began to notice subtle arrangements, clusters that shifted ever so slightly from night to night, forming lines, shapes, and sequences that appeared deliberate, almost like a language crafted from starlight. The constellations seemed to whisper to her, beckoning her attention, offering guidance, and illuminating paths that remained hidden from the ordinary eye. Leora's first discovery came one night when a small cluster of stars appeared aligned in a pattern that corresponded perfectly to a forgotten alcove behind the pantry. She traced the shapes with her fingers against the glass, memorizing their arrangement, and later explored the corner in secret. There, she found a hidden door, nearly invisible against the wall, which led to a narrow staircase descending into the cool shadow of the cellar. Excitement and awe coursed through her as she realized that the stars were not merely points of beauty in the sky, they were guides, teaching her to move safely, to find freedom, and to navigate spaces that had been designed to constrain her. Each night, Leora's relationship with the stars deepened. She began recording their movements in small, private journals, sketching the constellations and noting the subtle shifts that indicated new pathways or safe places within the household. Sometimes the stars highlighted a loose floorboard, other times a slight gap in a curtain, and once they traced a route along the roofline that allowed her to move from one wing of the house to another unseen. The constellations became a silent mentor, teaching her the art of observation, the patience to notice detail, and the courage to act when the timing was right. Even the cold, restrictive walls of Isra's home could not diminish the quiet hope and determination the stars inspired within her. Leora also began to interpret the stars' messages in ways that went beyond mere movement or escape. Sometimes the arrangement suggested caution, a need to wait, or a moment when Isra's gaze would turn toward her. Other times, they seemed to offer reassurance, promising protection or signaling that a particular action would be safe. The patterns were not easy to understand at first, and she had to study them closely, noticing small variations in brightness, angle, and clustering that hinted at meaning. Slowly, she developed a form of literacy in celestial communication, understanding that the stars could convey complex guidance as clearly as spoken words if one paid careful attention. In addition to teaching strategy and caution, the stars offered comfort. On nights when Isra's malice seemed particularly oppressive, when the stepmother's whispers rang through the corridors or her commands confined Leora to shadowed corners, the constellations provided solace. The brilliance of the stars reminded her that light persisted even in darkness, that the universe itself had not abandoned her, and that guidance and hope were available if she looked and listened. Each flicker was a message of resilience, encouraging her to maintain kindness, patience, and courage even when the house and its inhabitants sought to suppress her spirit. The villagers, unaware of Leora's nightly communion with the stars, continued to remark on her quiet composure and the gentle light in her eyes, sensing that she was growing in wisdom beyond her years. Leora's studies with the stars also taught her empathy and discernment, allowing her to read subtle shifts in behavior and intentions in those around her. She became attuned not only to celestial signals but also to human gestures, whispers, and expressions, learning to navigate Isra's schemes with foresight and care. One night, the constellations aligned in a particularly striking formation, stretching in a long arc that traced the edge of the household garden and pointed toward a path leading out of the visible grounds. Leora followed the signs meticulously, memorizing the route and identifying each marker the stars illuminated. She felt a surge of exhilaration and anticipation. The stars were not merely protecting her, they were actively guiding her toward freedom, teaching her that her confinement was temporary and that the world beyond Isra's control awaited her discovery. Through these nightly lessons, Leora cultivated patience, resilience, and intelligence, understanding that true freedom required careful observation, trust in guidance, and courage to act at the right moment. The stars' whispers became her constant companions, steadying her heart and illuminating both her inner strength and the hidden routes that would allow her to move unseen. No darkness, no human malice, could dim the quiet glow of the constellations or the hope they instilled. In this secret dialogue between the girl and the night sky, Leora found not only safety but purpose, learning that even when constrained by envy and restriction, she could chart a path guided by light, wisdom, and the unerring watchfulness of the stars above. As twilight settled over the household, painting the walls with soft shadows and the fading warmth of the sun, Leora felt the familiar pull of the stars above. They shimmered with a subtle urgency that evening, their constellations aligned in a sequence she had learned to interpret over months of careful observation. Each flicker and cluster seemed to whisper encouragement, guiding her gaze toward a narrow gap in the far wall of the house, a space she had noticed before but dismissed as insignificant. Tonight, however, the stars made it clear. This was her moment. Carefully and quietly, she moved through the dimly lit corridors, her footsteps measured and silent, avoiding the areas Isra frequently patrolled. Every glance upward reassured her, the celestial patterns reflecting the exact path she needed to follow, a map drawn in light. The hidden passageway was narrow and winding, a subtle crack in the wall leading down a series of uneven stone steps. Leora navigated carefully, feeling the cool, damp air of the underground corridor brush against her skin. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She knew the risks. If Isra discovered her absence, punishment or worse would follow. Yet the pull of freedom, reinforced by the stars' unerring guidance, gave her courage and clarity. With every step, she imagined the constellations above her, each point of light a silent companion cheering her forward, showing her that the path to liberation was both possible and safe if she followed carefully. After several tense minutes, the corridor opened onto a space bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. Leora's breath caught as she realized she had emerged into a hidden garden, a secluded haven tucked behind thick walls of ivy and tall, ancient trees. The air here was different, sweet with the scent of wildflowers and the earthy perfume of moss and soil. Tiny fireflies drifted through the twilight, their lights flickering in harmony with the stars above, as though the celestial guidance had extended to this secret sanctuary. It was a place of serenity and magic, a space where she could move freely without the prying eyes of her stepmother or the oppressive weight of household rules. Here, Leora began to explore and experiment with her gifts in ways she had only dreamed of. She moved gently among the plants, learning to sense subtle shifts in the air, the vibrations of the soil, and the silent signals of the wildlife that shared the garden. Her starlit eyes seemed to resonate with the natural world, reflecting and amplifying the light of the moon and the stars. She discovered that by focusing her attention she could sense the hidden patterns in nature, the way leaves moved with the wind, the rhythms of the insects, and the delicate pulse of life around her. It was as if the garden had been waiting for her, a space created or preserved by fate to nurture her abilities and to teach her the balance between observation, intuition, and action. Each evening, Leora returned to this secret haven, guided first by the constellations and then by her growing confidence in reading the subtle cues of her environment. She began to experiment with small gestures of light and energy, discovering that her gaze could calm restless creatures, that her hands could encourage plants to grow in gentle patterns, and that her presence itself seemed to harmonize the space. The stars above continued to communicate, highlighting areas to explore, teaching her patience, and offering subtle corrections when her focus faltered. Over time, Leora learned to interpret the messages of both the heavens and the earth, merging celestial guidance with terrestrial observation to cultivate a unique understanding of her gifts. Beyond the magic and wonder, this secret garden offered her the emotional freedom she had long been denied. She laughed aloud among the flowers, her voice carrying freely without fear of reprimand, and she danced beneath the moon, feeling the wind and the soft pulse of the earth beneath her feet. Her heart, long constrained by Isra's jealousy and the confines of her household, began to expand in response to the gentle encouragement of nature and the stars. In this space, Leora could dream, learn, and grow in ways that were impossible within the restrictive walls of her home. The secret garden also became a place of reflection. Leora contemplated the lessons of patience, resilience, and observation she had learned from the stars in her confinement. She understood that freedom was not only about physical space but also about the ability to perceive, to choose, and to act in alignment with one's own light. The garden, hidden and serene, became both classroom and sanctuary, nurturing her mind, spirit, and heart. As days passed, Leora's connection to the stars deepened. The constellations continued to guide her, showing paths through the forest surrounding the garden, indicating which plants held secrets for healing, and revealing patterns that allowed her to interact with nature in harmony. Each evening, she returned to her window to watch the sky, knowing that the stars would always be her allies, their light unwavering, pointing the way forward. In this secluded haven, Leora learned that even in a world constrained by envy and malice, the guidance of light, both celestial and inner, could reveal paths to freedom, growth, and self-discovery. The village, once familiar and orderly under the rhythm of daily life, began to feel subtly, almost imperceptibly, unsettled. Isra, confident in her control over Leora, strutted through the streets with the pride of one who believed her schemes had succeeded. She spoke with neighbors, praised Celia for her apparent obedience and charm, and made sure to remind anyone who asked that Leora's life was carefully managed within the household walls. On the surface, everything seemed as it had been. The routines maintained, the children occupied, and the adults busy with their trades and chores. Yet beneath this appearance of normalcy, the village was shifting in ways that no one, not even Isra, could have anticipated. The first signs were subtle, almost easy to dismiss. Crops that had previously grown predictably in fields and gardens began to behave strangely. Corn stalks leaned toward the edges of the plots as if seeking light elsewhere, beans twisted toward unseen directions, and patches of wildflowers that had been dormant sprouted unexpectedly, scattering color across the village in irregular patterns. Farmers scratched their heads, muttering about the weather, the soil, or omens, but none could explain why these irregularities had begun precisely after Isra's attempts to hide Leora. There was a quiet understanding among a few elders that something extraordinary was stirring, something linked to the child they had all admired since birth. Nightfall brought even stranger occurrences. The sky, once predictable in its constellations, appeared brighter and more vibrant than usual, as if the stars themselves were performing a dance visible only to those who paid close attention. Some nights, the constellations seemed to form faint patterns pointing toward the forest edge or the hills beyond the village, their light subtly guiding paths or hinting at spaces untouched by human intervention. Villagers who glimpsed the unusual brilliance whispered among themselves, uncertain whether to be awed or fearful. The children, drawn to the light, would peer upward with wide eyes, feeling a connection they could not explain, sensing that the universe itself was attempting to communicate something vital about the girl whose life had been confined to walls and shadows. Whispers began to circulate more deliberately. Neighbors spoke quietly about Leora's unusual presence, recalling how her gaze had seemed to shimmer even from within the household. Some remembered stories of her birth, the rare celestial alignment that had coincided with her arrival, and the subtle magic her eyes seemed to hold. Rumors mixed with awe and speculation. Some suggested that her confinement was unnatural, that no child so blessed by the stars could be restrained without consequence. Others feared that Isra's jealousy might provoke unseen forces, that meddling with someone touched by the heavens could bring imbalance or misfortune to the village. As the days passed, the pattern of strangeness continued. Animals behaved differently. Birds gathered in larger flocks than usual, resting in the trees nearest to Leora's home. Foxes and other small creatures seemed to linger near boundaries of the village, observing rather than fleeing. Even the wind carried a strange rhythm, brushing along the streets and whispering through the open windows with a tone that seemed deliberate, almost sentient. Villagers felt it in their bones. Something was stirring beyond their comprehension, an energy that was neither threatening nor destructive but undeniably powerful. Those who were attentive, particularly the elders and midwives who had known Leora since her birth, began to understand that the girl's destiny extended far beyond the household's walls, beyond even the confines of their village. Isra, oblivious to the subtleties around her, continued to boast of her supposed control. She flaunted Celia's obedience, arranged domestic routines meticulously, and believed she had successfully hidden Leora's influence from the village. Yet her confidence was undermined by subtle shifts she could not explain. Guests noticed small changes in the air when they approached the house, a sense of quiet energy that seemed to hum just out of sight. Lights appeared to shimmer in odd ways within the windows, sometimes fading when observed directly, other times pulsing with gentle, unseen motion. Even the children, unaware of the true nature of the patterns, remarked to their parents about how the night sky seemed more alive, brighter, and somehow watching. As Leora moved through her hidden garden, guided by the stars, her influence extended silently, almost invisibly, into the village. Though Isra believed she had silenced or contained the child, the subtle magic of Leora's presence could not be fully hidden. Each plant that thrived oddly, each animal that lingered, and each gleam of starlight visible in the streets carried traces of the girl's influence, whispering to those who were open to perceive it. Villagers, particularly those attuned to nature and celestial patterns, began to sense that Leora's confinement was temporary, that her gifts were meant for something far greater than the narrow schemes of her stepmother. By the end of these days, a quiet tension settled over the village. Isra remained confident on the surface, yet the people's eyes told a different story. There was a collective, unspoken understanding that Leora's destiny could not be contained, that the stars and the world beyond the household were aligning in ways that would soon reveal truths no jealousy or control could suppress. The village, though unaware of all the details, began to feel the first stirring of awe, curiosity, and anticipation, sensing that the girl born under the stars was destined to illuminate far more than just her own path. As Leora spent more nights beneath the celestial canopy, following the constellation's delicate guidance through her hidden garden and secret paths, she began to notice patterns that extended beyond mere direction or safety. The stars seemed to communicate with her on a deeper level, revealing not only how to navigate her constrained world but also secrets long buried by time and malice. At first, the revelations were subtle, an unusual alignment of constellations over the village house on nights when Isra plotted, or flickers in the sky that seemed to mark areas within the household that held hidden compartments. But gradually the messages grew more intricate, forming a tapestry of guidance and knowledge that intertwined with both her immediate circumstances and her ancestral heritage. The first startling revelation came one night when Leora traced a particularly bright cluster of stars forming a complex pattern above her window. She recognized the shapes as symbols she had glimpsed in ancient scrolls and carvings hidden in the garden shed, relics of her mother's secret studies. When she connected the dots mentally, the constellations mapped a series of hidden passages and overlooked rooms within the house. One of these led to a small, forgotten chest beneath the floorboards, filled with letters, maps, and trinkets that chronicled Isra's schemes against her and documented the alliances that the stepmother had forged with certain villagers eager to claim control or status. Leora understood that the stars had not only shown her physical paths to freedom but had illuminated the lies, betrayals, and dangerous ambitions surrounding her. Beyond the household, the constellations revealed secrets about the village itself. Ancient alignments pointed to forgotten landmarks, a hollow in the old oak tree where elders once hid valuable knowledge, a small clearing in the forest where medicinal herbs had been cultivated for generations, and a hidden spring said to hold sacred waters blessed by ancestors. Each location the stars highlighted carried historical significance, detailing past events that had shaped the village's current hierarchy and power dynamics. Leora realized that her stepmother's control over her had been part of a long chain of attempts to dominate the lineage of the girl born under the rare celestial alignment. Her mother, Caria, had safeguarded these truths, leaving encoded clues and lessons in her wake, and the stars now illuminated these secrets for Leora to understand. Through these nightly observations, Leora also began to piece together her family's destiny. The constellations revealed fragments of prophecies tied to her birth, that a child born under a rare alignment would possess the vision to perceive both hidden truths and paths forward, acting as a guide and healer for the village when darkness and deceit threatened to dominate. She saw hints of her mother's role in protecting sacred treasures, not merely material wealth but knowledge, remedies, and talismans that could sustain the community through trials. The star's light traced subtle connections between these treasures, showing how each was safeguarded, which villagers had been entrusted with fragments of the legacy, and how Isra's manipulations had attempted to sever these links. As Leora absorbed these revelations, she also began to understand her stepmother's motives more clearly. Isra had sought not only to suppress Leora's talents but also to erase her influence entirely, consolidating power for herself and Celia. The celestial patterns highlighted specific nights when Isra's plans had been most active, revealing alliances with certain families who had coveted Caria's knowledge or sought to manipulate village politics. Leora saw that some villagers' smiles hid opportunism, while others' quiet concern indicated allegiance to the girl they had once quietly admired. This understanding allowed Leora to distinguish between true friends and potential threats, guiding her decisions with a clarity that Isra could never anticipate. The stars' guidance also strengthened Leora's intuition and resolve. Their glow illuminated hidden dangers and revealed safe spaces, not merely as practical knowledge but as a lesson in discernment and timing. Leora learned to wait for moments when Isra's attention wavered, to move silently through corridors, and to act decisively when opportunity arose. The celestial wisdom extended beyond survival. It offered insight into justice, compassion, and strategy, showing her how to correct the imbalance imposed by her stepmother without resorting to cruelty or revenge. Over time, Leora began mapping these revelations in her journals, creating a detailed record of secret passages, ancestral legacies, prophecies, and hidden treasures. Each night, as she traced the constellations above, she realized that her journey was not only about personal freedom but also about restoring balance and knowledge to her village. The stars, steadfast and luminous, became mentors, guiding her to uncover truths buried beneath envy, secrecy, and fear, ensuring that when the time came she would emerge not only free but empowered, equipped with wisdom to challenge deceit and illuminate the darkness that had long overshadowed her world. Under the soft glow of a crescent moon, Leora moved through the secret paths she had memorized, guided by the familiar constellations that had been her companions through months of confinement and learning. Each flicker of starlight seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat, a silent encouragement that she was on the precipice of reclaiming not only her freedom but also the dignity and recognition long denied by Isra's schemes. The hidden garden had nurtured her strength, patience, and understanding of both nature and celestial guidance, and now these skills converged as she prepared to return to the heart of the household, where her stepmother and Celia remained ensconced in the illusion of control. As she emerged from the final concealment beneath the ivy-covered wall, Leora noticed that the stars above seemed to blaze with unusual intensity, as though rallying behind her cause. The villagers, accustomed to the nightly brilliance, sensed something extraordinary in the air. From the edges of their homes and along the narrow streets, they peered toward the household, whispering among themselves as if drawn by an invisible pull. Some children, recognizing the shimmer of starlight in Leora's eyes even from a distance, ran to watch, feeling instinctively that the girl whose presence had been hidden was about to assert her rightful place. The stars were not merely guides now, they were heralds, amplifying her return with light and intention, validating the importance of her presence to all who looked. Inside the household, Isra and Celia were unaware of the approaching reckoning. Isra's confidence had been nurtured by months of suppressing Leora, ensuring that everyone in the village believed she controlled the girl's life. She had spoken often of Leora's supposed frailty, emphasizing Celia's beauty, obedience, and aptitude, weaving tales that cast her stepdaughter as fragile, powerless, and undeserving of attention. Yet, as the first streaks of starlight touched the walls of the house in alignment with Leora's movements, subtle signs betrayed cracks in her carefully constructed facade. The shadows and corners seemed to bend toward Leora rather than Isra. Even the wind shifted as if whispering her name, guiding her path through the home with gentle insistence. When Leora stepped into the main hall, the contrast between the starlit girl and the stepmother's rigid composure was striking. Her eyes shimmered with the quiet fire of one who had endured, learned, and emerged stronger. She moved calmly, deliberately, letting the celestial patterns guide her actions. The stars seemed to highlight hidden truths. Faint scratches in the walls marking where Isra had attempted to confine her, hidden compartments where letters of deceit were stored, and subtle changes in the air that hinted at her stepmother's secret plots. Villagers who had quietly gathered outside the windows and doors witnessed the scene unfold, sensing the revelation before even seeing it fully. Leora's first words were measured but firm, carrying the authority of someone backed not by threats but by undeniable truth. She recounted the injustices she had endured, the moments of envy, manipulation, and concealment orchestrated by Isra. As she spoke, the stars above aligned in patterns that mirrored her statements, tracing constellations that highlighted hidden compartments and secret passages, illuminating the evidence of Isra's deceit for the villagers to see. The light glimmered on hidden letters and objects, revealing bribery, false claims, and attempts to manipulate the household's affairs. Murmurs of shock, disbelief, and understanding rippled through the gathered crowd, confirming the girl's account in ways that no words alone could achieve. Celia, who had long been groomed to believe in her mother's superiority and Leora's frailty, shrank back in confusion and fear. The stars seemed to reflect in Leora's eyes, doubling their brilliance and casting an aura of authority and inevitability around her. Even Isra's attempts at verbal deflection and intimidation faltered under the celestial validation of truth. The villagers, previously uncertain or silent, stepped forward, acknowledging the courage, patience, and wisdom Leora had cultivated. The atmosphere shifted. Isra's dominance waned, replaced by the undeniable recognition that the girl she had tried to suppress was not only resilient but also divinely guided, her presence essential to the village's balance. The confrontation unfolded not with violence but with clarity and revelation. Leora's words, combined with the alignment of stars and the visible evidence, exposed the full extent of Isra's envy and manipulation. The celestial patterns seemed to amplify each truth, making deception impossible to maintain. The villagers, now fully aware of the stepmother's actions, offered Leora support and recognition, restoring honor and respect to her lineage. By the time the night deepened, the household was transformed. Isra, stripped of her illusions of control, could only watch as Leora stood illuminated by starlight, embodying both the light she had been born under and the strength she had cultivated in secret. The stars' revelation had succeeded. Not only had they guided her safely back, but they had also ensured that truth, courage and integrity prevailed, marking the beginning of Leora's rightful place in the village and the household she had once been hidden from. As dawn broke over the village, the sky still tinged with traces of the night's celestial glow, Leora stepped into the open square with quiet confidence. Word of her confrontation with Isra had spread quickly, and the villagers gathered, drawn by curiosity, awe, and a burgeoning sense of respect. Children clung to their parents, wide-eyed, while elders nodded knowingly, recognizing that the girl born under the rare celestial alignment had fulfilled the promise whispered at her birth. The air itself seemed charged with a gentle energy, as if the heavens above were smiling upon her and confirming the truth that had long been hidden from the village. Leora was destined to shine, not just with light in her eyes, but with wisdom, compassion and guidance for all who sought it. Leora's first acts as the Star Child were deliberate and heartfelt. She walked among the villagers, observing the crops, the animals, and the homes that had suffered under Isra's manipulations. Her touch was gentle yet potent, her gaze imbued with the unique shimmer of her starlit eyes, and wherever she moved, subtle changes occurred. Crops that had wilted under neglect or subtle interference began to regain vitality, water drawn from the village wells shimmered with clarity, and the animals, once skittish or restless, grew calm and harmonious in her presence. The villagers watched in wonder, realizing that the gifts they had once feared or dismissed were not only real but transformative. Leora's abilities were not born of magic alone. They were extensions of her empathy, patience and understanding of the natural and celestial worlds. Beyond physical restoration, Leora shared knowledge and insight. She taught the villagers to observe the stars, to recognize the subtle signs in the wind, the leaves and the patterns of animals that spoke of balance and health. She explained how her mother, Caria, had encoded wisdom in rituals, songs and stories, knowledge meant to guide future generations in harmony with nature and the cosmos. The villagers listened attentively, recording her instructions and following her guidance, eager to learn and to preserve the teachings that had been nearly lost. Her lessons were never imposed. She led with patience and understanding, allowing each person to grasp the significance of the knowledge at their own pace, fostering both respect and devotion. Leora also addressed the emotional wounds that lingered in the village. She encouraged forgiveness and understanding, speaking openly about the consequences of envy, jealousy, and deceit. She reminded the villagers that Isra's actions, while cruel and misguided, had been born of fear and desire for control, and that hatred alone would perpetuate suffering. Instead, Leora taught that compassion, vigilance, and the pursuit of truth were the most powerful forces for harmony. Parents embraced her guidance. Children learned to observe and respect the natural world, and even those who had once aligned with Isra began to recognize the value of honesty, humility, and cooperation. As her reputation grew, Leora became known as the Star Child not merely for her luminous eyes but for the illumination she brought to the hearts and minds of those around her. She mediated disputes, healed minor ailments with her mother's herbal knowledge, and guided villagers in understanding the balance of life and nature. Her presence became a symbol of hope and resilience, a living reminder that adversity could be transformed into strength when tempered with patience, insight, and empathy. Even Isra, now humbled by the events and the villagers' recognition of Leora's gifts, began to understand the depth of the child's influence. Though she had once sought to suppress and control, she could not deny the truth revealed by the stars and witnessed by all. Leora offered guidance to her stepmother as well, demonstrating that leadership and respect were earned through integrity and service, not deception and favoritism. As weeks and months passed, the village transformed under Leora's stewardship. Children played under starlit skies, learning to read the constellations as guides. Fields flourished with the wisdom of careful observation, and communal rituals revived the forgotten practices that honored both the heavens and the earth. Leora remained humble, her heart untouched by pride, always emphasizing that her gifts were meant to serve, to heal, and to teach, not to dominate. The Star Child's rise was complete not with grandeur or ceremony but with quiet, steadfast influence. She had turned confinement and jealousy into strength, fear into wisdom, and solitude into guidance for her community. Her story spread beyond the village, carried in whispers and songs, a living testament to the enduring power of compassion, insight, and the celestial light that had watched over her from the very beginning. In every glance of her starlit eyes, the villagers saw hope, courage, and the promise that even in darkness, a guiding light could always shine, teaching them the values of forgiveness, understanding, and harmony with the world around them.